Pour mine
Look at
first.
this.
Tae-Yang
She really
Choi
thinks she's in charge.
slid the crystal
I don't
decanter
think, I
across the
know.
white
Wait,
linen
what?
tablecloth
Enjoy your
without
new
looking
position.
up, his manicured finger pointing at Isla Mercer like she was furniture. Kyung-Jin laughed behind his hand, muttering in Korean, "They really hired someone this pretty just to serve water? What a waste of a dress." Isla's fingers closed around the decanter, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the full noon light flooding through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 34th floor conference suite. She smiled, not the smile of someone embarrassed, but the smile of someone counting down. She set the water down beside his glass, smoothed the front of her emerald strapless gown, and let their laughter run its full course. Neither man noticed the nameplate already placed at the head of the table. Neither man noticed it read, Isla Mercer, CEO, Ashford Global Properties, and neither man had any idea that the building beneath their imported shoes belonged entirely to her. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. It is noon on a Tuesday in October, and the 34th floor of Ashford Global Properties headquarters sits at the precise intersection of ambition and architecture. The conference suite stretches 40 feet from its double glass entry doors to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook Midtown's skyline, every surface illuminated with the kind of clarity that belongs to rooms designed to make decisions in. Overhead recessed lighting casts a clean, even brightness across the white linen tablecloth. Natural skylight pours through the panoramic windows from the south, filling the room with warmth that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with power. The imported floral arrangements, white calla lilies and green orchids, chosen specifically to mirror the Ashford Global color palette, stand in low crystal vases at measured intervals down the table's length. 3 crystal decanters, each filled with still water imported from a Norwegian spring, catch the noon sun and scatter small prisms across the ceiling, like a quiet celebration no one else can see yet. Isla Mercer arrived 45 minutes ago. She did not come early out of anxiety. She came early, the way a chess player arrives early, to know the room before anyone else does, to feel the light, to understand the acoustics, to stand at the head of the table in total silence and simply inhabit it. She is wearing the emerald strapless gown she selected 3 weeks ago when she first confirmed this meeting, the deep green fabric structured at the bodice and falling in a clean architectural line, paired with tailored wide-leg ivory trousers that give her silhouette a precision that is entirely intentional. Her diamond tennis bracelet, her mother's reset, circles her wrist and catches every variation of light in the room as she moves. Her hair is pinned at the crown in a low, exact chignon. Her lipstick is a deep fig. She looks extraordinary. She always does. She has learned, over the course of her career, that looking extraordinary in rooms like this one is a form of language, and she has become entirely fluent in it. She is standing at the far end of the suite when they arrive, her reading glasses on, reviewing the 73-page acquisition brief for the 14th time that morning, not because she needs to, but because thoroughness is the only luxury she allows herself before a deal closes. Her portfolio is open on the table before her. Her pen is in her right hand. She does not look up immediately when the suite doors open, because she has no reason to. This is her room. She is not waiting, she is working. Tae-Yang Choi enters first. He is a man who carries his status the way some men carry cologne, aggressively, in every direction, without apparent awareness of how much of the surrounding air it consumes. He is dressed in a charcoal slim-cut suit with a pale gold tie, his shoes a glossy Italian leather that belongs in a different city entirely. He surveys the conference suite with the casual authority of a man who has walked into many rooms and assumed, without exception, that they belonged to him. His eyes move across the linen, the flowers, the decanters, the view. His eyes move across Isla Mercer. They do not stop. That is the thing she will remember later. Not the slide of the decanter, not the words, but the dismissal in that first glance, the fraction of a second in which she was categorized and filed away with no further investigation required. He saw the gown. He saw the bracelet. He saw the elegant woman standing alone in a room arranged for service, and he completed the equation without solving it, because in his experience, the equation had never required solving. Beautiful woman, elaborate dress, conference room in preparation. The answer was obvious. The answer to Tae-Yang Choi had never been anything other than obvious. Kyung-Jin enters behind him, shorter and rounder, with an energy that cycles between nervous and sycophantic at speeds that suggest years of practice. Behind them comes their translator, a young Korean-American woman in a navy blazer and charcoal trousers, her expression carefully neutral, and an assistant carrying a leather briefcase that he sets immediately against the wall before retreating to stand near the door. Tae-Yang Choi sets his phone on the table. He adjusts his cufflinks. He does not introduce himself. He looks at the crystal decanter nearest to his preferred seat, the seat to the right of the head position, which is standard placement for a senior guest, and which tells Isla Mercer immediately that he has assumed the head of the table will be occupied by whoever he is here to meet, and that the person he is here to meet is not currently present, and that the woman reviewing documents at the far end of the room is there to make the experience of waiting more comfortable. He slides the decanter across the tablecloth toward her without looking up from his phone. "Pour mine first," he says. The English is accented but perfectly functional. The authority in it is total. It is the authority of a man who has never once in the entire course of his professional life been wrong about a room. Kyung-Jin leans toward the translator and mutters in Korean, the words sliding out low and amused behind the cover of his raised hand. The translator does not translate. She does not move. Kyung-Jin eyes travel across Isla Mercer's figure with the unapologetic assessment of someone who has decided, also without evidence, that the assessment is appropriate. "What a waste of a beautiful woman," he murmurs, "to spend the afternoon serving water." Isla Mercer hears every syllable. She sets down her pen. She removes her reading glasses and folds them with one hand. A motion so practiced, it takes perhaps a quarter of a second. She picks up the decanter. The crystal catches the noon light through the skylight and throws small geometries of brightness across the white tablecloth, across the floral arrangements, across the hands of Tae-Yang Choi, who is still looking at his phone. Isla's face is arranged into an expression of complete serenity. Her eyes are calm. Her jaw is unclenched. Her shoulders sit exactly where they belong, which is back and down and perfectly even, because she spent a full year of her early 30s training her body not to show what her mind was doing. Her mind right now is doing something very specific. It is counting, not forward. Not a countdown to the meeting start time, though that is also running in the background. With the precision of a Swiss mechanism, she is counting backward from a number she established years ago. A private system developed during the first acquisition negotiation she ever walked into as the only woman of color in the room. When a man in a similar suit said something similar in a similar tone, and she learned, irrevocably, that her reaction in the next 3 seconds would define whether the deal was hers or not. She lost nothing that day. She lost nothing because she counted. She has been counting ever since. The count is not a suppression mechanism. That is a misunderstanding of what she does. She is not suppressing anything. Suppression requires effort, and effort has a cost, and Isla Mercer does not pay that cost when she can spend the same currency somewhere infinitely more productive. What the count is, what it has always been, is a conversion. She takes what Tae-Yang Choi just handed her, and she converts it. Dismissal becomes data. Contempt becomes clarity. The assumption that she is invisible becomes the most powerful weapon in a room she has owned since she was 34 years old. She pours the water. She pours it from precisely the right height, with precisely the right tilt of the crystal decanter, and the water enters the glass in a clean, quiet arc that fills it exactly to the correct level. The sound of it is the only sound in the room for a moment. Then she sets the decanter down. She straightens. She smooths the front of her emerald strapless gown with one hand. Not a nervous gesture, not a deferential one, but the gesture of a woman ensuring that the armor is correctly positioned before she continues. She says absolutely nothing. Not nothing because there is nothing to say. There is enough to say to fill the rest of this afternoon and well into tomorrow. She has the vocabulary, the register, the language. She has 3 languages in point of fact, and the one she will deploy in approximately 45 minutes will rewrite every assumption currently operating in this room. She says nothing because nothing is the correct strategic choice, and Isla Mercer has never in her professional life confused the urge to speak with the wisdom of when to speak. Kyung-Jin settles into his chair with the satisfied comfort of a man whose comfort in this room has never been questioned. He says something else in Korean. His posture is too elegant for a waitress. He observes to no one in particular, which seems to strike him as genuinely funny. He allows himself a short laugh. Tae-Yang does not respond, already absorbed again in the screen of his phone. The translator keeps her eyes on the table surface. Isla Mercer walks back to the far end of the suite, picks up her reading glasses, and opens her portfolio to page 41. She reads. She annotates a figure in the left margin with 2 small, precise marks. She turns the page. She is the most dangerous person in this room, and she is the only one who knows it. It is Kyung-Jin who speaks again first, this time directing a comment in Korean toward Tae-Yang with a tone that implies he is sharing something worth sharing. Something about the catering, something about the schedule, something about whether the actual CEO has perhaps been delayed. Tae-Yang responds without looking up. His eyes drift, briefly, without purpose, across the length of the conference table. They travel from the floral arrangement nearest him, across the water glasses, across the clean expanse of white linen, and they arrive, for approximately 2 seconds, at the head of the table, at the nameplate. It is positioned exactly where Claire Sutton placed it 40 minutes ago. Centered at the head of the table, angled precisely toward the room, the raised gold lettering, catching the overhead recessed light with the kind of quiet certainty that belongs to things that have been exactly where they belong for a very long time. Isla Mercer, CEO, Ashford Global Properties. Tae-Yang eyes rest on it for 2 seconds. Then 1 second more. Something flickers at the edge of his expression. Not recognition, not understanding, just a faint, passing shadow of a question that does not fully form before he dismisses it entirely, returning his gaze to his phone screen with the same casual authority he brought into the room. The nameplate remains at the head of the table. The clock on the wall reads 12:02 p.m. Isla Mercer turns another page of her portfolio and underlines a single number in blue ink, very slowly, very precisely. She is still counting. She moved through the suite the way she always moved through rooms she owned. Quietly, precisely, with the particular ease of someone who has nothing to prove to the walls. Isla Mercer lifted the second leather portfolio from the credenza beside the window and carried it to the head of the table, setting it down with both hands, squaring its edges against the corner of the nameplate Claire had placed there 40 minutes ago. The overhead recessed lighting caught the crystal decanters. The noon skylight poured clean and white through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Tae-Yang Choi speaking to Kyung-Jin in low tones, comfortable tones, the kind of voice a man uses when he believes no one listening matters. She adjusted the portfolio 1 centimeter to the left. She breathed. She went somewhere else for a moment, the way she had learned to do. Not away from the room, never away from the room, but deeper into it, into the part of the room that most people never found because they never thought to look for it. The foundation. Thomas Calloway had a saying he used so often that Isla stopped hearing it the way children stop hearing anything said too many times by the people who love them. She only started hearing it again after he was gone. Every room has a foundation, he would tell her, and somebody laid it. Every single room. Before the marble, before the lighting, before the view. Somebody was on their hands and knees in the dark, working, and the whole beautiful thing you're standing in rests on what they did when nobody was watching. He said it about buildings because buildings were his life. Thomas Calloway had been the superintendent of a 6-story walk-up on 138th Street in Harlem for 22 years. He knew every pipe in that building by sound. He knew which radiator knocked on cold nights, and which stairwell light needed 30 seconds to warm up, and which tenant's lock needed a firm shoulder before the key would turn. He loved that building with the specific, unsentimental love of a man who understood what it cost to keep something standing. He showed Isla its boiler room when she was 7 years old, holding her hand in the damp heat, pointing at the enormous old furnace with quiet reverence. That is the heart, he told her. Everything warm in this building comes from here. Isla straightened the notepad beside the portfolio. She aligned the pen. She had not planned to go into real estate. She had wanted to study architecture, then law, then finance, in that order, changing her mind with each year of high school in the way of someone who could see herself doing many things because she had always known she was capable of most of them. What decided it was Columbia. The admissions process for Columbia Business School had a particular quality of resistance, not impossible, but demanding enough to feel like something worth clearing. She cleared it at 24. She paid for it herself, work study, and a scholarship that covered 60% and the rest from 4 years of parallel jobs that she did not list on her resume because there was nothing wrong with them, but she knew how rooms read that kind of resume, and she was already learning the difference between truth and strategy. Columbia taught her the language of capital. It taught her how acquisition structures worked, and how due diligence functioned, and how to read a balance sheet the way her father had read a boiler room. Not just for the numbers, but for what the numbers were hiding. She graduated in the top 8% of her class. She shook hands with a man at a networking event 3 weeks before graduation who offered her a position at his mid-sized commercial property firm. She worked there for 4 years. She left to start her own. At the credenza, she uncapped the spare marker beside the whiteboard remote, recapped it, set it parallel to the edge. Through the glass doors she could see Derek Holloway standing in the corridor, his dark navy blazer buttoned, a tablet tucked under one arm, his eyes sweeping the hallway with the particular vigilance of a man who had been protecting someone's work for a long time without ever being asked to reduce that protection. He glanced through the glass and found her eyes. She gave him the smallest nod. He returned it and looked away. Derek Holloway had been with her for 9 years. He had watched her walk into rooms where she was the only woman, the only black woman, the only person in the room who had paid her own tuition with her own labor. He had never once said anything about any of it because he understood, as she did, that naming a thing too loudly sometimes lets it win. He simply stood outside the glass and made sure the corridor was clear. The Korean years had not been planned either. She had closed her first international deal at 30, a commercial office complex outside Busan, a city of color and port noise and extraordinary food, a city that did not care who you were until you showed it who you were. The deal took 14 months. She had arrived with a translator and left 4 months later without needing one for anything practical, not because she enrolled in classes or downloaded an application, because she was in the rooms, because she sat across tables from people whose language she did not yet speak, and she listened with the full force of everything she had, because she learned what a word meant by watching a man's face change when it was said. because she understood, her father's daughter, entirely, that a language is not a system of sounds. A language is a room, and somebody built it, and if you want to be trusted inside it, you have to understand its foundation. She spent 4 years moving between Seoul and Busan. She built relationships that had nothing to do with deal-making and everything to do with being present, being honest, being the kind of person who showed up when she said she would and remembered what people told her about their families and their concerns. She ate the food. She learned the customs. She made mistakes and corrected them and was forgiven for the mistakes that were honest ones. By the time she returned to New York, with her 4th international acquisition closed, her Korean was not textbook perfect. It was better than that. It was Seoul dialect, cadenced the way it was cadenced in actual boardrooms and restaurant conversations, and the long, honest discussions that happened after the formal meetings were over. Nobody had given that to her. She had built it, piece by piece, the way a foundation is built. The year she made her first million, Thomas Calloway had a stroke in the boiler room of the building on 138th Street. He was found by a tenant 3 hours later. He lived for 11 days in the hospital. Isla sat beside him for 7 of those days, sleeping in the chair, holding his hand, talking to him about the deals she was going to close and the buildings she was going to buy, and all the rooms she intended to walk into and own. She did not know, in those 11 days, whether he could hear her. She chose to believe he could. On the 11th day, at 4 in the morning, with no drama and no sound, Thomas Calloway's heart simply stopped. She did not cry at the hospital. She cried in the elevator on the way down, alone, which felt right because it was honest, and she dried her eyes before the doors opened because that also felt right. She drove to her office. She sat at her desk. She looked at the name on the letterhead, Mercer Properties, LLC, and she thought about a 6-story walk-up on 138th Street and a man who knew every pipe in the walls by sound, who had shown his daughter the heart of a building in a hot basement and called it exactly what it was. She renamed the company Ashford Global Properties. Ashford was his mother's maiden name. He had mentioned it once in passing, and she had remembered it the way she remembered everything that mattered. She filed the name change papers herself. She framed the filing confirmation and hung it in her office, and she had never once explained to anyone what it meant. At 34, she acquired this building, this specific building, the one they were all standing in right now, the one with the 34th floor conference suite she had personally designed, the overhead recessed lighting she had chosen, the skylight she had insisted on over the objection of 2 contractors who said the installation would be complicated. She had looked at them both and said, "I know it's complicated. Do it anyway." She was 38 now. 14 international acquisitions, a portfolio that stretched across 4 continents, a staff of 216 people, 40% of whom she had hired personally, all of whom she knew by name. The $200 million deal sitting on the table today was not the largest of her career. It was not even the most complex. What it was important to her for reasons she had not shared with anyone on her team. The Choi Group's portfolio contained a block of commercial properties in Busan, the same city where she had sat across her first international table at 30 years old, understanding nothing yet, listening with everything she had. Acquiring it felt like something that closed a circle. Like a foundation being completed. She placed her hand on the back of the chair at the head of the table. Her chair, her room, her building. Across the suite, she caught a small motion near the door. Claire Sutton was in the doorway for just a moment. Poised, precise, her dark blazer over a white blouse, a tablet in her hands. And she caught Isla's eye with the micro-expression of someone sharing a secret. A quiet thumbs up. Small enough that only Isla could see it. The nameplate is in position. Everything is exactly where it should be. Isla gave her the smallest possible smile in return. and Claire was gone. Then Tae-Yang Choi laughed. It was a sudden, sharp sound. The laugh of a man who is completely comfortable in his own assumption. He said something to Kyung-Jin in Korean, and Kyung-Jin made a sound of amused agreement, a suppressed chuckle behind his hand, and the words were clear as anything, shaped and delivered, without the faintest consideration that anyone in the room might understand them. Her posture is too elegant for a waitress. She carries herself like she thinks she belongs here. Isla Mercer heard every syllable. She heard the vowels land. She heard the particular cadence of Kyung-Jin agreement, high and quick, the laugh of a man who finds cruelty easier when someone above him starts it. She heard the ease of it, the complete, comfortable ease of two men in a room they were certain belonged to them, speaking freely in a language they were certain was a wall. She felt the old heat, the disciplined, quiet, familiar heat that she had been managing since she was the youngest woman in every room she walked into at 26, then the only black woman at 30, then the only person in the room who had built everything she had with no margin for error and no net beneath her. The heat that could, if she let it, burn wrong. She had never let it burn wrong, not once. She let it instead do what it had always done. She let it heat the iron. She let it make her precise. Isla Mercer reached the head of the table. She picked up her pen. She uncapped it slowly, with the same hand that had poured the water, the same hand that had straightened the nameplate, the same hand that had signed 14 international contracts in 4 countries and held her father's hand for 7 days while she told him about all the rooms she was going to walk into. She wrote a single note in the margin of the top page of her portfolio. In Korean, "They are ready." She capped the pen. She stood at the head of the room her father had taught her to see. She waited. The clock on the far wall read 11:30. 30 minutes. 30 minutes until the formal start time of a meeting that would determine the fate of a $200 million acquisition. And Tae-Yang was asking Isla Mercer whether the catering had confirmed its arrival window. He asked in Korean. He didn't look up from his phone when he did it. "Catering이 몇 시에 오나요? 우리 측 손님들이 곧 도착합니다." Catering, what time are they arriving? Our guests will be here shortly. The overhead recessed lighting flooded the 34th floor conference suite in clean clinical white. The skylight above poured noon sun across the linen tablecloth in long, generous panels, catching the crystal decanters, bouncing off the polished mahogany tabletop, illuminating every face in the room with a precision that left nothing in shadow. The room was immaculate. It had been immaculate for 45 minutes, which was exactly how long Isla Mercer had been inside it. She was standing near the credenza, along the east wall, her emerald strapless gown catching the light at the bodice, her tailored wide-leg ivory trousers falling in perfect lines to the floor. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the sun as she picked up a leather portfolio and set it down at a specific position, the position she had already decided on, at the head of the table, resting gently on top of the nameplate that Claire Sutton had placed there 43 minutes ago. She heard every syllable of Tae-Yang Korean with effortless clarity. She let one full second pass. Then she turned, expression open and pleasant, and said in easy, unhurried English, "I believe catering confirmed a 12:15 service window. They'll set up in the adjacent anteroom." She smiled. She turned back to the credenza. Tae-Yang made a sound that fell somewhere between acknowledgement and dismissal and returned to his phone. He had not looked at her face when she answered. He had looked briefly at the direction of her voice, the way a person looks toward a speaker in the ceiling, a source of information, not a person. Beside him, Kyung-Jin leaned sideways in his chair and murmured something to the man seated to his left, one of the junior assistants from the Choi group who had arrived carrying a thick binder and a rolling luggage case full of documents. Kyung-Jin voice was low, but not quiet enough. It was never quiet enough. It had not been quiet enough since the moment he walked in. "그 여자 진짜 예쁘긴 한데 이런 방에서 소빙이나 하고 있다니." Akapta. She really is stunning, but serving in a room like this, what a waste. Isla Mercer did not blink. She picked up a printed agenda from the credenza and walked to the far end of the table, where she set 3 copies with geometric precision in front of 3 empty chairs. Her heels made a clean, measured sound on the hardwood. Her posture was architectural, not rigid, not performed, simply the posture of a woman who had occupied important rooms for so long that her spine had learned to claim space as a matter of course. Inside, behind the composure, there was a counting. There had always been a counting, since the first time she had walked into a room and watched a man look past her to find someone with authority. She had learned early that the counting was power, that every second you gave a person enough rope to wrap around themselves was a second they could not get back. The discipline was not in the restraint. The discipline was in understanding that the restraint itself was the weapon. 27 minutes, she thought. 27 minutes left to let them have everything. The second exchange came 8 minutes later. Tae-Yang Choi had moved to the far end of the conference suite where the projection screen was mounted, gesturing at the ceiling-mounted projector with visible impatience. His suit was charcoal, double-breasted, expensive. His shirt was pale blue, collar open by 1 button. He stood the way men stand when they assume that whatever they need will be provided before they finish the thought. 이 프로젝터 리모컨 어디서요? 화면이 너무 밝아서 발표 자료가 안 보일 것 같은데. Where is the projector remote? The screen is too bright. Our presentation materials won't be visible. Isla Mercer was at the opposite end of the room. She walked toward him at an even pace, not hurried, not slow, and opened the top drawer of the control console built into the credenza beneath the screen. She removed the remote, extended it toward him, and said, "The brightness control is the second button from the top. The room system is linked to the building's AV panel. If you need further adjustment, I can have the tech team dial in remotely." Tae-Yang took the remote without making eye contact. "Good," he said in English. The word dropped like a coin into a tip jar. Behind him, back at the table, Kyung-Jin had tilted his head to watch the exchange. He smiled the smile of a man enjoying something that didn't cost him anything. He spoke to the junior assistant again in Korean, low and loose and entirely confident in his invisibility. "진짜 모델 같지 않아? 호텔에서 섭외한 거 아닐까? 이런 고급 미팅에는 원래 저런 사람 써. Doesn't she look like a model? Maybe the hotel hired her. High-end meetings like this use people like that." The junior assistant said nothing, eyes down, focused on his binder. Isla Mercer walked back to the head of the table. She pulled out the chair, not to sit, but to adjust the angle by 2 degrees, and then she stood behind it with her hand resting on the back, looking at the document spread in front of her portfolio. She looked like a woman reviewing materials. She was a woman reviewing materials. She was also the only person in the room who understood everything being said in it. It was almost funny. It would have been funny if it were a scene in a film. In a film, the audience laughs because they know what the character does not. They watch the trap being assembled in real time, and they want to reach through the screen and say, "Stop. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know what room you are standing in." But this was not a film. And Isla Mercer had long since stopped expecting the trap to stop itself. The glass doors of the suite opened. Nadia Ose walked in. She was wearing a fitted black blazer over a deep burgundy blouse, her natural hair pulled back sharply, a leather document folio under one arm, and reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She was 34 years old, and she had the particular energy of a woman who had spent a decade being the sharpest person in rooms that underestimated her, and who had made peace with it in a way that now read simply as confidence. Her eyes found Isla Mercer immediately. The look Isla Mercer gave her lasted approximately 1 second. It communicated, with the compression of long partnership, something along the lines of, You are seeing exactly what you think you are seeing. Do not react. Take your seat. We are 30 minutes out. Let it run. Nadia Osei's expression did not change. She walked to the chair along the wall, not the main table, the support seating, set her folio on the floor beside it, and crossed her legs, and opened her reading glasses, and began reviewing a document with the focused disinterest of a woman who was simply doing her job. The suppressed smile lasted exactly half a second before it was gone. She was a professional. Isla Mercer allowed herself the smallest exhale. Then she walked to the hallway door, slipped through it with the quiet efficiency of someone stepping out to check on a logistical detail, and found Derek Holloway exactly where she knew he would be. He was standing 6 feet from the door in a charcoal suit and white shirt, sleeves buttoned, a tablet in one hand and an earpiece in the other, reading something with his reading glasses low on his nose. He looked up the moment she appeared. Isla Mercer leaned in slightly and kept her voice below the ambient noise of the hallway. "Let them have the full 30, she said. Derek Holloway did not hesitate. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has worked beside someone long enough to trust the architecture of their decisions. He said nothing back. She was already turning toward the door. Inside, Kyung-Jin had apparently grown more comfortable in the preceding minutes because his commentary had escalated in both volume and confidence. He was speaking to Tae-Yang now, not the assistant, and his voice carried across the conference suite with the relaxed entitlement of a man who believed entirely that the walls around him did not understand Korean. 부장님, 저 미국 CEO들 말이에요. 어차피 오늘 그 사람 회색 양복 입은 전형적인 미국 아저씨겠죠. 포트폴리오 들고 악수나 하러 오는 사람. 우리 조건대로 사인하면 되는 거 아니에요? Director Choi. These American CEOs, the one today is probably just a typical American man in a gray suit. Someone who shows up with a portfolio and a handshake. We'll just get him to sign our terms, right? Tae-Yang made a sound between a laugh and a confirmation. 미국 사람들은 다 비슷해. 숫자만 보여주면 돼. Americans are all the same. Just show them the numbers. Isla Mercer was refilling a water glass on the side console. Her back was to them. Her hand was steady. Kyung-Jin glanced toward her and dropped his voice by exactly the wrong amount. Still entirely audible, still entirely Korean, still entirely fatal. 저 여자는 사장 오면 어디 가는 거예요? 그냥 인테리어였나? When the CEO arrives, where does she go? Was she just decor? She set the water glass down. She smoothed the front of her ivory trousers with one hand, the motion unhurried and deliberate. She did not turn around. She counted to 3, then she walked back to the head of the table, stood behind the chair, and picked up her pen. The third exchange was the one she had been waiting for. Tae-Yang looked up from his phone, scanned the room with the territorial assessment of a man establishing hierarchy in a space he assumed belonged to him, and let his gaze settle on the nameplate at the head of the table. He had glanced at it before. She had watched him do it in Chapter 1 and dismiss it half-read. This time he looked at it more directly. Then he looked at Isla Mercer standing behind it. 저기요, 좀 명패 치워줄 수 있어요? 주최자가 아직 안 왔는데 시야에 걸리네요. Excuse me, could you remove that nameplate? The host hasn't arrived yet, and it's obstructing my view. The room was very bright and very still. Isla Mercer looked at the nameplate. She looked at Tae-Yang Choi. Her expression was pleasant, composed, and entirely unreadable. She said, in English, warm as a closed door, "I'll make sure it's addressed before the meeting starts." Tae-Yang Choi nodded and looked back at his phone. Done. Handled. Dismissed. Along the wall, Nadia Osei turned a page of her document. She did not look up, but the corner of her mouth had gone very tight and very still in the way that mouths do when they are containing something enormous. The clock on the wall read 11:55. 5 minutes. Isla Mercer set her pen down, straightened the edge of her portfolio with 2 fingers, and walked toward the private washroom at the far end of the suite with the easy, unhurried movement of a woman stepping out for a moment of quiet. The door closed behind her without a sound. Inside, the overhead light was bright and immediate. She stood at the mirror and looked at herself. The gown, the trousers, the bracelet, the face that had been composed and pleasant and unreadable for the last 35 minutes. She reached up and removed her earrings. Both of them, small diamond drops, set them on the edge of the sink. She rolled her neck, one full rotation, slow and deliberate, until she heard and felt every point of release along her spine. She breathed in through her nose. She breathed out through her mouth. She looked at her reflection again. She was still there. She was always still there. What walked back out of that washroom 60 seconds later wore the same gown, the same trousers, the same bracelet, the same face. But something in the quality of the stillness had changed. Something had settled, the way a building settles into its foundation. Not movement, but the final, irreversible declaration of weight. Isla Mercer opened the washroom door and stepped back into the room. 4 minutes and 50 seconds to noon. She walked toward the head of the table, and she did not look at Tae-Yang Choi, and she did not look at Kyung-Jin, and she did not look at the clock. She picked up her portfolio. She stood behind the chair. She thought, for one single second, of a building superintendent in Harlem who told his daughter that every room has a foundation and someone who laid it. She pulled the chair back. She sat down. The clock on the wall read 11:58 a.m. 2 minutes. The 34th floor conference suite of Ashford Global Properties blazed with the full force of noon. Overhead recessed fluorescence humming in perfect concert with the broad skylight that ran the length of the eastern wall, pouring undiluted white sunlight across every surface in the room. The white linen tablecloth held no shadows. The crystal decanters threw small rainbows onto the ceiling. There was nowhere to hide in this room. Every face, every expression, every micro-movement of the hands was visible to anyone paying attention. Isla Mercer had been paying attention since 11:15 a.m. She stood near the credenza at the far end of the room. Her emerald strapless gown, a precise vertical line above her tailored wide-leg ivory trousers. Her diamond tennis bracelet catching the skylight the way it always did at this hour. She had bought this building, had sat in this room on enough noons to know exactly where the light landed. Her portfolio rested closed on the table beside her. Her pen was uncapped. She had been still for the last 4 minutes, in the particular way that very powerful people learn to be still. Not passive, not waiting, but coiled. A watch spring at maximum tension. A word held behind sealed lips. Tae-Yang sat at the long side of the conference table in a charcoal suit jacket over a white dress shirt. His top button fastened, no tie. The jacket cut close and expensive in a way that was designed to communicate seriousness without effort. He had not looked at Isla Mercer directly in the past 20 minutes. He had looked at his phone. He had looked at the door. He had looked at Kyung-Jin, who sat to his left in a steel blue suit jacket and matching trousers, fidgeting with a pen and laughing at whatever Tae-Yang said, with the speed and reliability of a man whose employment depended on it. The translator, Min Ji-yoon, sat slightly back from the table in a cream blazer over a blush blouse. Her tablet open, her eyes down. She had been down for most of the last 30 minutes. She was a young woman, late 20s at most, and she had the particular stillness of someone who had learned that staying invisible was a form of professional survival. She had heard everything, every word, the same as Isla Mercer. Nadia Osei sat along the wall, to Isla Mercer's left, in a deep navy blazer over a white fitted top, a legal pad open across her knee, her reading glasses on, her expression arranged into the careful blankness of a woman who had spent a decade in boardrooms and courtrooms and knew exactly how to keep her face from broadcasting what her mind was doing. What her mind was doing right now was constructing a precise catalog of every statement made in Korean in this room for the past 30 minutes. She was thorough like that. Isla Mercer had hired her precisely because of that. At 11:58 and 30 seconds, Tae-Yang Choi looked up from his phone. He looked around the room the way a man looks around a room when he owns it, or believes he does, with a slow proprietary survey that started at the door and ended, after a brief pause at the crystal decanters, on Isla Mercer. He raised 2 fingers, not 1, 2. The gesture a person makes when they are summoning someone whose name they have not bothered to learn. The gesture that contains in its very geometry the full weight of an assumption that the person being summoned has been placed in this room for the purpose of responding to exactly that gesture and should be grateful for the direction. He spoke in Korean. His voice was unhurried, conversational, pitched loud enough for Kyung-Jin to hear, which was the point. In Korean he said, 야, 거기 훈련 받은 거야? 미팅에 앉아 있으라고 교육 받은 거야? 아니면 그냥 코스 사이에 예쁘게 서 있으라고 데려온 거야? Hey, you over there? Were you trained for this? Were you trained to sit in on meetings? Or were you just brought here to look pretty between courses? Kyung-Jin laughed, openly, easily, the laugh of a man who has made the same kind of joke 100 times in 100 rooms and never once been corrected for it. Min Ji-yoon did not laugh. Her spine went rigid in the way a spine goes rigid when every muscle in a body is fighting a simultaneous instruction to react and an overriding instruction to survive. Her eyes dropped further. The tablet in her hands was the only thing she looked at. Her jaw moved once, slightly, as if she was swallowing something. Isla Mercer heard every syllable. She heard the Korean the way she had heard Korean for years, not as a foreign language, not as sound requiring translation, but as meaning, immediate and whole, landing in her mind with the same clarity as English. She had earned that. She had earned it in Seoul and Busan, over 4 years of early mornings and late dinners, and the particular kind of attention you pay to a language when you understand that language is not just communication but relationship, and relationship is not just business but trust, and trust is not given but constructed, brick by careful brick, the way a building superintendent's daughter learns to understand foundations. She felt the words. She filed them. She did not move her face. What she did, and this was the thing about Isla Mercer, that the people who loved her most understood, and the people who underestimated her most consistently missed, was that she did not suppress the feeling. She did not pretend it wasn't there. The heat that moved through her chest when Tae-Yang Choi raised those 2 fingers was real, and she acknowledged it with the full respect it deserved, because dismissing what you feel is not discipline, it's denial, and denial makes you brittle. She felt it, she named it, she placed it, precisely and deliberately, into the architecture of what was about to happen. Every condescending syllable Tae-Yang Choi had spoken in the past 45 minutes was not an injury, it was a brick. And she had been building something with those bricks since the moment he slid the decanter across the table without looking at her. Then Tae-Yang switched to English. He picked up the decanter himself, just long enough to slide it across the table toward her. And when he spoke, his English was deliberate, the words chosen with the blunt confidence of a man who had used this particular tone on service staff in hotel lobbies across 4 continents. And found it consistently effective. Pour it again, he said. It's warm. The room changed temperature. Not physically. The overhead light still blazed. The skylight still threw its broad noon rectangle across the white linen. The crystal still caught the light. But something in the atmospheric pressure of the room shifted, the way pressure shifts in the seconds before a storm announces itself. And every person in that room felt it differently. Nadia Osei's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, barely visible, but for Nadia it was the equivalent of standing up and overturning the table. She kept her eyes on her legal pad. Her pen stopped moving. The door to the suite opened. Claire Sutton stepped in from the hallway. her tablet tucked under one arm, her black blazer neat over a white turtleneck, her expression carrying the particular bright professionalism of a personal assistant who has learned to read a room in the first half-second of entering it. She read this room in a quarter of a second. She froze in the doorway. Her eyes went to Isla Mercer, then to the decanter, then back to Isla Mercer. Her hand rested on the door handle, and she did not move it. She did not come in. She did not leave. She stood in that doorway like a person watching something that history was about to record. And she was not going to be the one who disrupted the frame. Isla Mercer looked at the decanter. It was crystal, imported, the same one she had selected from the catalog when she furnished this suite 3 years ago. The water inside it was perfectly clear. It was not warm. The suite was temperature controlled at 68 degrees, and the water had been brought up from the kitchen 40 minutes ago. The claim that it was warm was not about temperature. The claim that it was warm was about something else entirely. It was about a man who had spent the last 45 minutes building a version of this room inside his own head, a version in which the woman standing across from him existed to fill glasses and stay decorative and move when gestured at. And he was now defending that version, the only way a man can defend a fiction, by insisting on it harder. She looked at the decanter. She looked at Tae-Yang. His face held the flat patience of someone who fully expected to be obeyed. Isla Mercer reached out and picked up the decanter. She picked it up the way she picked up everything, with complete intention, both hands steady, no tremor, no hesitation, no performance of reluctance. She poured the water into Tae-Yang Choi's glass with perfect, unhurried accuracy. The stream was straight, the level was exact, not a drop on the linen. She set the decanter down with a small, precise click, the base meeting the table with the controlled finality of a period at the end of a sentence. She straightened up. She smoothed the front of her emerald gown with one slow pass of her right hand, the diamond tennis bracelet catching the overhead light and throwing a small constellation across the ceiling. And then, for the first time in 45 minutes, Isla Mercer turned her full gaze on Tae-Yang Choi. Not a glance, not a polite acknowledgement. Her full gaze, the one that Derek Holloway had once described privately to his wife as the look of someone who has already seen exactly how something ends and is giving you one final moment to understand it before it does. Her eyes were calm, completely, perfectly calm. The kind of calm that is not the absence of fire, but fire so controlled, so oxygenated, so absolutely directed, that it no longer flickers. It concentrates. Tae-Yang Choi looked away. He looked down at his phone. He did not look back up. He shifted slightly in his chair. He did not know why he had looked away. That was the thing. He had no name for what had just happened, no category in which to file the sensation of having made eye contact with a woman in an emerald gown across a conference table and being the one who blinked. He reached for his water glass. He didn't drink from it. Kyung-Jin had stopped smiling. Min Ji-yoon still had not looked up, but her hands, which had been flat and still on her tablet, had curled very slightly at the edges. Claire Sutton had not moved from the doorway. Nadia Osei had set her pen down. The second hand on the wall clock completed its final arc. The thin black line swept through the last few degrees of its rotation with the unhurried mechanical certainty of a thing that has no opinion about what it marks, only the function of marking it. And when it reached the top of its arc, it stopped. 12 p.m. Noon, the meeting's official start time. The room held its breath without meaning to. Isla Mercer reached down and picked up her portfolio. She pushed her chair back from the credenza. The legs moved soundlessly on the hardwood. She stood, all 5 feet 9 inches of her in that emerald gown and those ivory trousers, the bracelet brilliant under the fluorescent overhead panels, and the full merciless blaze of the noon skylight, the portfolio under her arm, her pen in her hand, her shoulders back, her chin level, her expression carrying something that every person in that room would later struggle to describe precisely, but would all, independently, reach for the same word to describe. Ready. She was ready. She had always been ready. She began to walk. The clock on the wall read 12 p.m. exactly, not 11:59. Not 1 second passed. 12 o'clock noon, in the fullest, most unforgiving brightness of a New York midday, with the skylight above the 34th floor pouring liquid gold across every white linen surface in the room, every crystal edge, every polished inch of the conference suite that Isla Mercer had purchased, renovated, and designed herself 4 years ago. She stood up. The movement was not dramatic. It was not rushed. It was not the kind of standing up that announces itself with noise or gesture. It was the kind of standing up that happens when a person has been waiting a very long time to do exactly one thing, and the moment has finally, irrevocably arrived. Her chair moved back from the table without a sound. Her spine straightened to its full height. Her hands were steady. Her emerald strapless gown caught the noon light across her collarbone. Her ivory wide-legged trousers fell in a clean line to the floor. Her diamond tennis bracelet flickered once, like a signal, like a small private fire announcing itself to a room that did not yet know it was about to be illuminated. Tae-Yang was still looking at his phone. Isla Mercer began to walk. The conference table was 32 feet long. She had measured it herself when she ordered it from the craftsman in Asheville, who built it from a single reclaimed oak slab. She had run her palm across its surface the morning it was installed, and thought about her father, about the floors he had mopped in other people's buildings, about the foundations he had laid in rooms where he was never invited to sit. She had 32 feet of that history beneath her heels now, and she walked every inch of it deliberately. The sound of her heels on the exposed hardwood border of the suite was a precise, unhurried rhythm. Click, click, click. Not loud, but exact. The kind of sound that once you heard it, you could not unhear. It moved through the room the way a tuning fork moves through air, not demanding attention, simply commanding it by the physics of its own frequency. Kyung-Jin heard it first. He looked up from the document he had been pretending to read and watched her move. His expression shifted in real time, from mild curiosity to a slight frown of confusion, the way a man's face changes when a thing is not behaving the way he calculated it would. She was not walking toward the catering station. She was not walking toward the projector panel. She was not circling toward the windows to adjust a curtain or returning to the side table where the extra water glasses were arranged. She was walking directly, without hesitation, without deviation, toward the head of the table. His eyes moved to Tae-Yang Choi, who had not yet looked up. Click, click, click. Nadia Osei was already watching from her seat along the wall. She had been watching since the moment Isla stood. She did not move. She did not smile. She held the stillness of a person who knows exactly what is about to happen and understands that the only correct response is to witness it without interference, the way you stand still during something rare in nature because movement might break the spell. Claire Sutton was at the suite doors. She had re-entered 40 seconds ago with a tablet and frozen in the doorway when the clock struck noon, and she was still there now, her hand resting lightly on the interior handle of the double doors, waiting for the only cue that mattered. Isla Mercer reached the head of the table. She set her portfolio down in the center of the seat position, directly on top of the nameplate that Claire had placed there that morning. The leather cover of the portfolio landed without a sound. Then Isla reached down with one hand, slid the portfolio to the side just enough, and lifted the nameplate from beneath it. Isla Mercer, CEO. Brushed gold letters on a polished walnut base. She held it for exactly 1 second. Then she set it down in front of her, at the forward edge of the table, angled precisely toward Tae-Yang Choi, so that the letters faced him directly, clearly, and without the possibility of misreading them from a distance of 15 feet. He looked up. The moment his eyes found the nameplate, something happened in his face that was not quite understanding. It was the step before understanding. The half second where the information arrives but the brain refuses to accept it because the implications are too enormous and too humiliating to process in real time. His eyes moved from the nameplate to the woman standing behind it. His eyes moved back to the nameplate. His hand, which had been holding his phone, lowered slowly to the table. Isla Mercer pulled the chair back. She sat down. She opened her portfolio with both hands, turned to the first page, smoothed the paper flat with her palm. She reached forward and adjusted the small conference microphone. A slight angle, a small correction, nothing excessive. She set her pen to the right of the portfolio. She folded her hands on the table. She lifted her gaze. She looked at Tae-Yang Choi. Not glanced, not surveyed. Looked with the full, unhurried, absolute attention of a woman who had been in this room for 45 minutes before he arrived, who had poured his water, who had heard every syllable he had spoken in a language he was certain she could not understand, and who had decided before he ever walked through the door exactly how this moment would go. The room was silent, not the polite silence of a meeting about to begin, not the transitional quiet between one agenda item and the next. This was a different kind of silence. The silence that forms when a group of people in a room simultaneously realize that the coordinates of power have shifted and that none of them, except one, were informed of the change before it happened. It was the silence of a room reorganizing itself around a new gravity. Kyung-Jin's hand was flat on the table. He had not moved it in 30 seconds. The translator, Min-Ji-yoon, sat very still at the corner of the table with her notepad open and her pen uncapped. She had spent the last hour interpreting for a man whose words had made her quietly sick. She had kept her eyes down because looking up felt like complicity and looking away felt like cowardice, and she had found no third option until now. Now she looked up, fully. For the first time since she had entered this room, she looked at the woman at the head of the table without apology or deflection, and what she saw made her breath leave her body slowly and without drama, the way air leaves a room when a window is finally opened. Her eyes filled. She didn't blink. She let it happen, because this was not a moment that deserved the composed face she had been wearing all morning. And then Isla Mercer spoke. Her voice was measured, low, formal. The consonants were precise, the vowels fully rounded, the cadence carrying the exact tonal weight and grammatical register of a woman who had not learned this language in a classroom, but had earned it across 4 years of early mornings and late negotiations in Seoul and Busan, in boardrooms and restaurants and market streets, in conversations where she was the only person in the room who looked the way she looked, and she had learned anyway, better than anyone expected, better than anyone deserved credit for predicting. She spoke in Korean. Gentlemen. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The circles moved outward from it silently and reached every edge of the suite before anyone had the presence of mind to respond. My name is Isla Mercer. Tae-Yang Choi did not move. He appeared to have forgotten how. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Ashford Global Properties. Kyung-Jin's face drained. It was not a figure of speech. The color left his face the way light leaves a room when the switch is thrown. Not gradually, not subtly, but all at once. A complete and sudden absence of something that had been there a moment before. You have been sitting in my conference suite, drinking my water, and speaking very freely in what you assumed was a language I would not understand. The silence after each sentence was its own instrument. Isla Mercer used it the way a conductor uses the space between notes, not as emptiness, but as structure, as the architecture that gives every word its full weight. I want you to know that I have understood every word spoken in this room since the moment you arrived. Tae-Yang Choi's mouth opened by approximately 3 millimeters. No sound came out. His phone was still on the table in front of him. He did not look at it. He did not look away from her. He appeared to be in the position of a man who has fully understood what is happening and has found for the first time in a very long while that there is absolutely nothing available to him. No leverage, no redirection, no subordinate to deflect toward. Nothing between him and the precise fluorescent-lit, skylight-flooded reality of what he had done and who he had done it to. Nadia Osei opened her portfolio. The sound of the leather cover was clean and deliberate, and it functioned as punctuation, the period at the end of a sentence that had been building for 45 minutes, for 4 years in Seoul, for 38 years of a life that no one in this room had correctly read from the outside. Claire Sutton placed both palms on the interior handles of the suite doors and pulled them closed. The soft, decisive sound of the double doors meeting their frame sealed the room completely. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything, of the casual cruelty of a two-finger beckoning gesture, of a crystal decanter slid across a table without eye contact, of Korean commentary about posture and beauty and what a woman was worth in a room like this. It was full of a nameplate that had been asked to be removed. It was full of 45 minutes of performance, of discipline, of a woman who had practiced absorbing exactly this kind of moment, so that when the moment that followed it arrived, she would be ready and calm and in possession of everything she needed. It was full of Thomas Calloway, who had told his daughter that every room has a foundation and someone who laid it, and who had died before he could see the room she would one day own and fill and conduct from its head. Isla Mercer let the silence breathe. She gave it 5 full seconds, which in a room that still and that charged felt like 5 minutes. She let Tae-Yang Choi sit inside it. She let Kyung-Jin sit inside it. She let Min Ji-yoon breathe through it. She let Nadia Osei settle into her chair, with the quiet readiness of a woman who had been waiting just as long, in her own way, for exactly this. Then Isla Mercer looked at the man at the other end of the table. She smiled. It was not a warm smile, and it was not a cruel one. It was the smile of a woman who had already won and knew it and felt no need to announce it beyond what she already had. It was the smile from the moment she had picked up the decanter, private and dangerous and entirely her own. She looked down at the first page of her portfolio. She looked back up. "Shall we begin?" The silence that followed those 2 words, "Shall we begin?" lasted exactly 4 seconds. Isla Mercer counted them the way she counted everything in rooms like this. Not with anxiety, but with the calm precision of someone who had already calculated where every second was going to land. 4 seconds of absolute cathedral-grade silence in a room flooded with noon light, with Tae-Yang Choi's face the color of old chalk, with Kyung-Jin's hands flat on the table as if he needed something solid to confirm he was still in his body. 4 seconds. And then Isla Mercer opened her portfolio, smoothed the first page with 2 fingers, and let the meeting begin. She spoke in Korean first, formal, Seoul dialect, the kind of register you used when you wanted someone to understand that you didn't just learn a language, you mastered it inside the city where it lived. "Let us start with the asset valuation framework," she said, her voice unhurried, each syllable placed like a piece on a board. "My team has completed a full comparative analysis of the Hansong portfolio holdings against the current Seoul Commercial Real Estate Index. I would like to walk you through where your numbers diverge from ours and why ours are correct." Tae-Yang reached for his own portfolio. His hands moved with a studied deliberateness that Isla recognized instantly, the physical performance of composure from a man who no longer possessed it naturally. He found his page. He looked at his figures. He said nothing yet. Kyung-Jin leaned toward him and murmured something low in Korean, the kind of murmur that was meant to be private. Isla heard every word. He said the numbers looked standard. He said perhaps they could redirect to the equity structure first. He said this as if he were the one steering the meeting. Isla let him finish. She looked at him with the quiet patience of a woman who had been vastly underestimated twice today already, and had decided that the third time was going to feel different for everyone involved. Kyung-Jin, she said in Korean, his name landing in his chest like a closed fist wrapped in silk. We will reach the equity structure in the third segment. Right now, I would appreciate your full attention on the valuation framework. There are 3 line items your company has misrepresented, and I want to address them before we go any further. Kyung-Jin did not murmur again after that. He picked up his pen. He sat straighter. He looked at his page. Nadia Ose, seated to Isla's left in her fitted charcoal blazer over a cream silk blouse, opened a tabbed section of her legal binder with the quiet efficiency of someone who had prepared for exactly this meeting and not a different one. She did not smile. She did not need to. Her presence at that table was its own form of language. Isla moved through the first segment with the systematic calm of someone who had lived inside these numbers for months. She had not simply reviewed the Hansung portfolio. She had traced it. She knew the acquisition history of every commercial property in the bundle, the depreciation schedules, the inflated projections on the Busan waterfront development that someone on Tae-Yang Choi's team had clearly hoped would pass unexamined. She laid it out line by line, switching between Korean and English with the fluid ease of a conductor moving between instruments, never losing the thread, never softening the edges. When she reached the Busan projection, she paused. She looked at Tae-Yang Choi directly. "The waterfront estimate," she said in English, precise and unhurried, "reflects a 17% growth projection over 3 years. I would like to know which market model your team used to arrive at that figure, because the 3 independent analyses my team commissioned all land between 9 and 11%. That is not a rounding difference. That is a structural misrepresentation of projected returns, and it affects the acquisition price we are willing to offer by approximately $18 million. Tae-Yang Choi looked up. There was something moving across his face that was not quite anger and not quite embarrassment. It was the particular expression of a man who had walked into a room expecting a performance and found a verdict. He cleared his throat. He straightened his jacket, a dark navy suit, fitted, the kind that had been expensive enough once that he still wore it like armor. He placed both palms on the table. "Ms. Mercer," he said, and the formality of the name in his mouth was its own small surrender. "The projections were developed by our senior analytics team in conjunction with the Seoul Urban Development Council. We are confident in the methodology." Isla looked at him for one long, still moment. "I spoke with Director Kwon at the Seoul Urban Development Council on Tuesday," she said. "He confirmed that your team requested a preliminary outlook, not a formal projection endorsement. The document you have attached to this portfolio as a council-verified projection is not that. It is an internal estimate your analytics team prepared using the preliminary outlook as a reference point. Those are 2 very different things, and I believe you know that." Tae-Yang Choi did not respond immediately. The room was very quiet. The overhead lights were steady and clean, and through the full-height windows the afternoon sky sat enormous and blue above the city, flooding the suite with the kind of light that left nothing in shadow. Kyung-Jin shifted in his seat. He started to speak, opened his mouth, touched the edge of his portfolio, and then he saw the way Isla Mercer's gaze moved to him, patient and complete, and he closed his mouth again. Tae-Yang Choi tried a different angle. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice into the register men used when they wanted to suggest that a negotiation could be resolved between reasonable people, privately, with the implication that this reasonable privacy was something the other party should want. "There is flexibility," he said, "in how we structure the valuation conversation. We are open to adjustment, but the acquisition price as proposed leaves limited room for our board to feel." "Your board held a call on the 14th, Isla said, in Korean evenly. "I am aware that the acquisition price was described internally as favorable by 3 of the 5 board members present. I am also aware that the objection came from the Treasury side and that it was specifically about timing, not price. So when you tell me the price leaves limited room, I would appreciate knowing which room specifically you mean. The silence that followed that sentence was a different species from the silence after the revelation. That silence had been shock. This silence was something slower. It was the sound of a man recalibrating every assumption he had carried into the building. Tae-Yang Choi's posture shifted. It was almost imperceptible, the way a tide shifts, not dramatic, not announced, simply different when you looked again. He was no longer leaning back. He was forward now, elbows on the table, and his eyes had moved from her face to the page in front of him, and there was something in that downward gaze that Isla recognized as the beginning of a man who was starting to understand where he actually stood. Kyung-Jin attempted one more redirect. He brought up the equity structure, the third segment Isla had told him they would reach in sequence, and tried to use it as a lever to soften the valuation discussion, suggesting that a more generous equity arrangement might offset the projection dispute. He spoke quickly. He kept his eyes on his own portfolio rather than on Isla. His voice had lost its earlier ease completely. Kyung-Jin, Isla said, in Korean, the same way she had said it the first time. Unhurried, precise, and containing within its calmness a finality that was impossible to misread. We will reach the equity structure when I say we have reached the equity structure. We are not there yet. He stopped talking. The door to the suite opened quietly. Derek Holloway entered in his charcoal slacks and a deep burgundy button-down, long-sleeved, his bearing as composed as always. He carried a single document, a revised term sheet, 2 pages, clipped together. He walked to Isla's end of the table, set the document beside her portfolio, and looked at her. She looked at him. Nothing was said. A nod passed between them, small and complete, carrying inside it the full weight of years of trust, of every meeting they had navigated together, of every room she had walked into and rebuilt from the inside out. Derek Holloway turned and left the suite as quietly as he had entered. The door clicked shut behind him. Isla looked at the revised term sheet. She did not read it in front of them. She already knew what it said. She had written the language herself that morning. She set it to her right and continued. The meeting moved through its segments with the kind of momentum that belonged entirely to one person. Isla took them through the equity structure, the acquisition timeline, the governance provisions, the exit clause framework. She answered questions before they were fully formed. She cited figures without consulting her notes. When Tae-Yang Choi found a corner of genuine ambiguity in the liability cap language and pressed it, his one real technical counter of the meeting, delivered with the focused energy of a man who had located something worth fighting for, Isla listened to the full argument. She let him make it completely. She waited. Then she dismantled it in 3 sentences. The liability cap as written reflects standard international acquisition protocol for commercial real estate portfolios above 150 million, she said in English. Your precedent example uses a single asset acquisition structure, which is a different instrument. The comparison does not hold. Tae-Yang looked at the page. He looked at it for a long time. Min Ji-yoon, seated at the side of the table where translators sat, translated the exchange for the record with the careful, precise diction of someone who was fully present in the room now, in a way she had not been permitted to be before. Her voice was steady. Her expression was open in a way that had not been true an hour ago. She did not look at Tae-Yang when she translated his words. She looked at her notepad, but when she translated Isla Mercer's words, she looked up. It happened each time without apparent intention. A small, involuntary act of orientation, the way a plant turns toward a window. Nadia Osei worked through the legal documentation with the quiet precision of a surgeon. She flagged 2 clauses for amendment, proposed exact replacement language on the spot, and cross-referenced 3 prior international acquisition agreements from Ashford Global's portfolio to establish precedent. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every word she placed on the table landed cleanly and stayed there. The afternoon light had shifted by degrees through the tall windows, stretching longer and warmer across the white linen tablecloth, across the crystal decanters that had not been touched since the meeting began. The room was completely still, in the way that rooms become still when the balance of power has settled so fully in one direction that even the air seems to have decided where to stand. Isla looked at the final revised contract page. She looked at the figures, the terms, the language she had crafted and refined across 4 months of preparation, across 14 prior acquisitions, across years of becoming exactly this precise a version of herself. She picked up the page. She walked around the table and set it in front of Tae-Yang Choi. She set it down flat, directly in front of him. No ceremony, no performance, simply the act of placement. Then she uncapped her pen, looked at it for one still moment, and capped it again. She looked at Tae-Yang Choi. "조건은 최종입니다," she said. "The terms are final. 세 번째 역제안 이후에는 재협상하지 않습니다. I don't renegotiate after the 3rd counter." Tae-Yang Choi stared at the page. He stared at it, the way a man stares at something when he is no longer looking for a way out of it, but beginning, slowly and at great cost, to accept that it is real. The figures were what they were. The terms were what they were. The woman standing at the head of the table in the room she owned, in the building she had bought, conducting a negotiation in his own language, with a mastery that had unmade him quietly and completely over the course of a single afternoon. She was exactly who she had always been. He stared at the page, and Isla Mercer stood at the head of her table and waited, as she had always been perfectly, devastatingly capable of doing. The word recess left Isla Mercer's mouth like a period at the end of a sentence she had already written days ago. Not a question, not a suggestion, a statement delivered in the same measured, unhurried Korean she had been conducting the meeting in for the past 47 minutes. And when she rose from the head of the table, portfolio closed, diamond bracelet catching the full overhead fluorescent light and the wide afternoon slant of sun pouring through the skylight, no one in that room made a single sound to stop her. Not Tae-Yang Choi, who was sitting forward now with both elbows pressed hard into the white linen tablecloth, his navy double-breasted jacket slightly rumpled from the tension his own body had been holding since the moment Isla had spoken her first sentence in Seoul dialect Korean. Not Kyung-Jin, whose nervous energy had curdled somewhere around the 3rd deal point into something closer to a man sitting very still because he did not trust his own legs to hold him upright if he moved. Not Nadia Ose, who was already cross-referencing a clause in the revised term sheet with the focused expression of a woman who knew exactly what was about to happen next and had chosen to let it arrive on its own schedule. Isla walked toward the suite doors. Claire Sutton, stationed just inside near the credenza in her charcoal blazer and fitted black trousers, pulled the left door open with a quiet, practiced pull. Their eyes met for less than a second. Isla gave her nothing visible. Claire gave her everything invisible. A steadiness in her gaze that said, "I've got this room," without a single word spoken between them. The hallway outside the 34th floor conference suite was bright with recessed lighting, and the enormous north-facing window at the far end that opened onto a sheet of clear afternoon sky. The corridor smelled faintly of the imported floral arrangement stationed near the elevator bank. White ranunculus and eucalyptus, the same arrangement Isla had approved from the florist herself on Monday morning. Derek Holloway was already there. He was standing 3 feet from the suite doors in his charcoal gray suit with a white open-collared dress shirt, his tablet tucked under his left arm, his expression carrying the particular quality it always carried when something significant had developed, and he was choosing the right words to report it. He had served as Isla's chief of staff For 6 years, he did not lead with drama. He led with facts. "Chairman Byung-Soo Park," Derek said, and he said it quietly, with no preamble, because Isla had always taught him that context should follow the name, not precede it. "He's been reached." Min Ji-yoon sent a message to his direct office line during the meeting. She didn't copy anyone. She went straight to the top. Isla was quiet for a moment. She looked down the length of the bright hallway toward that wide rectangle of afternoon sky, her expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know her well. Derek knew her well enough to recognize what was moving behind her eyes. Not surprise, because Isla Mercer had not been surprised by a development in a business setting in a very long time. What was moving behind her eyes was something more precise than surprise. It was the quiet, careful recognition that a young Korean-American woman had sat in a room full of pressure, absorbed every humiliation on Isla's behalf as if it were her own, and then, quietly, discreetly, without being asked, had done the one thing that none of the people with actual power in that room had done. She had told the truth to someone who needed to hear it. "What did his office say?" Isla asked. "He wants to be patched in," Derek said. "He's available now." His assistant said he's been waiting. Isla turned that over once. Then she looked at Derek with the kind of directness that communicated everything in no particular hurry. "Give me 90 seconds, she said. She walked to the window at the end of the corridor and stood in front of it, the full weight of the afternoon sky behind her. She pressed both palms flat against the cool glass, not dramatically, but the way a person presses their hands against something solid when they need to feel something real. The city spread out below the building in every direction, rooftops and water towers, and the long, glittering avenues cutting through the grid. She had bought this building at 34 years old. She was standing inside it now at 38, in a hallway that existed because she had signed a deed of ownership, and 2 men were sitting in her conference suite who had looked at her and seen a woman who poured water. She thought, briefly, of her father. Not the grief of him. She had made her peace with the grief long ago. But the sound of his voice specifically. "Every room has a foundation, Isla. Somebody laid it. You make sure you know who that was before you walk through any door." Thomas Calloway had said that to her in the lobby of a building in Harlem, where he had worked as superintendent for 19 years. She had been 11 years old, wearing a yellow top and her school uniform's dark navy pants, standing next to him while he explained to a tenant why the boiler worked. He had not been speaking to her about business. He had been speaking to her about respect. She understood now, as she had understood at 20 and at 30, that there was no difference between the two. 90 seconds passed. She pushed off the glass. She turned around. Derek was waiting exactly where she had left him. "Open the video system," Isla said. "I'll connect from inside." She walked back through the suite doors without breaking stride. The conference room was exactly as she had left it, because it was always exactly as she left it. The overhead recessed lights and the full afternoon skylight illuminated every face with the kind of clarity that left nothing hidden, no shadow, no softness, no ambiguity. Tae-Yang was sitting with his jaw set, his eyes moving to Isla the moment she entered, and then moving away again, which was a habit she had noticed in men like him. They looked at power reflexively, and then looked away, because looking directly at it confirmed something they were not yet prepared to confirm. Kyung-Jin had his hands folded on the table in a posture that was attempting composure and achieving something closer to a person bracing for impact. Nadia Osei did not look up from her documents, but the slight adjustment in her posture, the way she settled back half an inch in her chair, told Isla everything Nadia needed to communicate. Min Ji-yoon, the translator, was sitting along the wall with her notepad in her lap and her eyes directed at the middle distance. But when Isla entered the room, Minji glanced up for exactly 1 second, and in that second her expression was the expression of someone who had done something terrifying and necessary and was waiting to find out what it cost. Isla looked at her directly. Not long, not dramatically, just long enough to let the young woman know she had been seen, and that what she had done had been seen, and that neither of those things would be forgotten. She crossed to the head of the table. She did not explain. She did not announce. She simply reached forward and opened the conference room's integrated video panel. The slim, brushed steel interface built into the table at the head position, the position that was hers, and connected the call that Derek had cued from the hallway. The screen on the far wall of the suite filled with light. Chairman Byung-Soo Park's face appeared. He was a formal man, late 60s, white-haired, with the kind of composed, deliberate stillness that came from decades of authority. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit with a white dress shirt and a tie the color of deep burgundy. The background behind him was a Seoul boardroom, its own overhead lighting, its own clean lines, its own table. He was sitting alone. He had clearly chosen to be sitting alone. The silence in the New York suite lasted 2 seconds before Chairman Park spoke. He spoke in Korean. His Korean was formal, measured and precise. The Korean of a man who had spent 40 years choosing every word carefully in boardrooms and who understood that the weight of language was not in its volume, but in its accuracy. Mercer Daepyonim, he said, which was the formal Korean address for a chief executive, delivered with the full weight of its deference. CEO Mercer, I am Chairman Byung-Soo Park of Hanso Capital Partners. I am deeply grateful that you are accepting this call. He bowed then, on screen, from Seoul to New York, to the woman at the head of the table in the room his executives had walked into that morning. He bowed fully and held it for a long moment. When he straightened, he continued, I have been made aware of the conduct that occurred in your conference suite today, prior to and during this meeting. I want to say to you directly and without qualification that the behavior described to me is a source of profound shame to this company and to me personally. What was said to you and about you in that room is not acceptable under any circumstance. It is not acceptable in business. It is not acceptable between people. He paused. I apologize to you, Mercer Daepyonim. On behalf of Hanseo Capital Partners and on behalf of myself, I apologize without reservation. The room in New York was absolutely still. Tae-Yang Choi had gone the particular color of a man whose world has reorganized itself around him at a speed he was not prepared for. The structure of his face did not collapse all at once. It collapsed in stages. First the jaw, which softened, then the eyes, which dropped, then the set of his shoulders, which had been carrying the posture of authority for 3 hours, and now carried nothing of the kind. Kyung-Jin had stopped looking at anything. He was looking at the tablecloth. He appeared to be concentrating on it with enormous effort, as though the pattern of the white linen contained some instructions he needed to follow. Chairman Park was not finished. I want to additionally inform Choi Bujang-nim and Yoo Cha-jang-nim, the formal address of their titles, both names stated on a video call they could see and hear, that their conduct during this trip and in this meeting has been noted. Their current roles in the acquisition project are under review, effective today. They will hear from our Internal Affairs Office upon their return to Seoul. He paused again, precisely. I expect their behavior, for the remainder of today's proceedings, to reflect the standards of this company, the standards it should always have reflected. Neither man said a word. Neither man was going to say a word. Tae-Yang Choi, who had gestured at Isla Mercer with 2 fingers beckoning, who had pushed a crystal decanter across a white linen table toward a woman who owned the table, the decanter, the white linen, and the building they were all sitting inside. Tae-Yang Choi sat with his eyes down and said nothing because there was nothing left that language could do for him. Chairman Park looked back at Isla. I thank you, Mercer Daepyonim, for your patience, for your professionalism, and for the opportunity you are extending to this company, despite what you experienced today. I hope that we can move forward from this point in a manner that is worthy of your trust." Isla Mercer had been still throughout the entire address. She had not interrupted. She had not looked at Tae-Yang Choi or Kyung-Jin while the chairman spoke. She had held Chairman Park's gaze through the screen with the same composure she had held in the hallway with her hands against the glass, in the washroom when she had removed her earrings and rolled her neck and stepped back into the room as the CEO version of herself. Now she inclined her head, and then she bowed, correctly, precisely, with the exact degree of angle appropriate to a response between equals of senior standing, not a subordinate bow, not a perfunctory nod, but the bow of a woman who had lived in Seoul long enough to understand that the form of a bow communicated everything the words around it might leave unsaid. "Gamsahamnida, Hojangnim," she said, in formal Korean. "Thank you, Chairman. Your words are received with respect. I look forward to a productive and lasting partnership between our organizations." She reached forward and closed the video panel. The screen went dark. The suite returned to its own silence. The silence of recessed overhead lights and afternoon sky and a white linen table with crystal decanters and a signed contract that was still 3 signatures away from completion. Claire Sutton moved from the credenza to the table with the quiet, unhurried efficiency that defined everything she did. She set a fresh glass of cold water in front of Tae-Yang Choi. She set one in front of Kyung-Jin. Neither man touched them. Isla Mercer placed both hands flat on the table, looked down the length of the conference suite she had purchased at 34 years old, and then looked up at the room with an expression that was not triumph, and was not anger, and was not anything that required a name. "Shall we finalize the contract?" she said, in English, clear and unhurried. "Or does anyone need a moment?" No one needed a moment. She opened her portfolio, picked up her pen, and the afternoon light poured through every window in the room. The pen made a quiet, final sound against the signature line. Not dramatic, not thunderous, just the small, clean click of something being completed. $200 million, Isla Mercer's terms, every single one of them, unaltered. The contract sat at the center of the white linen table like a fact that had always been true and had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. Nadia Osei closed her portfolio and let the silence hold for exactly one breath before allowing herself the smallest, most private smile. Derek Holloway, standing near the glass doors in a charcoal blazer and dark trousers, gave a single slow nod, the kind that carries everything a person cannot say in a room still full of people. Claire Sutton gathered the spare document copies with quiet efficiency, her movements deliberate, her chin slightly raised, the way people carry themselves when they have witnessed something they know they will never forget. The room began to empty the way rooms do after something irreversible has happened. Carefully, without ceremony, each person taking their portion of the afternoon with them. Min Ji-yoon was the last of the Choi group to gather her things. She had translated the entire meeting with precision and composure, but her eyes had told a different story for the last 2 hours. Wide, present, absorbing everything, she picked up her leather portfolio and her phone, and she stood for a moment at the far edge of the table. Then she walked toward Isla Mercer, not quickly, not nervously, deliberately. She stopped a few feet away, and she spoke in Korean, her voice low enough that only Isla could hear. She did not thank her for the deal. She did not mention the acquisition, or the terms, or the contract now sitting signed in the center of the table. She said, simply, that she had been in this industry for 6 years, and that she had never seen anyone in any room command herself the way Isla Mercer had commanded herself today. She said that she meant that with everything she had. Isla Mercer looked at her, really looked at her, the way she looked at people when she wanted them to feel seen all the way through. And she said, in English, quiet and certain, "Never let anyone move your nameplate." Min Ji-yoon did not respond immediately. The words landed somewhere deeper than conversation, somewhere in the architecture of who she was still becoming. She nodded once, and something in her expression shifted in a way that did not shift back. She would carry that sentence. Isla could see it happening in real time. Min Ji-yoon walked out. The glass doors swung softly behind her. Tae-Yang Choi had been standing near the door for nearly a full minute. He held his jacket folded over one forearm, his phone in his other hand, his eyes aimed somewhere between the floor and the middle distance. He was a man who had spent his entire career filling rooms with his own certainty, and the silence that occupied that space now was entirely foreign to him. He looked up once. His gaze crossed the room toward Isla Mercer. There was a beat, a genuine beat, the kind that lasts less than 3 seconds and contains an entire conversation that will never happen. His mouth opened almost imperceptibly, the faint beginning of something, an acknowledgement perhaps, or the ghost of one. He closed it. He turned. He walked out. Kyung-Jin followed 3 steps behind without looking back. The way people leave rooms when they are hoping the room will simply forget them. And then Isla Mercer was alone. The overhead recessed lights hummed softly above her. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon sky over the city was that particular shade of late gold that only arrives after the hard middle of the day has passed. Wide and honest and unhurried, it poured through the glass and across the white linen and across the signed contract and across the hardwood floor and across the nameplate at the head of the table. Isla Mercer, CEO. She reached down and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. It always had been. Not physically, not in any way a scale could measure, but in the way that certain objects carry the weight of everything that had to happen before you were allowed to hold them. She turned it in her hands. The afternoon light caught the raised letters and held them. She thought of Thomas Calloway. She thought of a man in a gray maintenance uniform and worn boots who came home smelling like pipe sealant and floor wax, and who sat at their kitchen table every evening and asked her what she had learned that day. Not what she had done, not how she had performed, but what she had learned. She thought of his hands, broad and certain, and permanently marked by the work of keeping other people's buildings standing. She thought of the way he used to say it, leaning forward on his elbows, with complete conviction. Every room has a foundation, baby girl, and somewhere there is a person who laid it. You find out who that person is before you walk through any door. She had found out. She had become her own answer. Thomas Calloway died the year she made her first million, before he could see the building she eventually bought, before he could stand on the 34th floor and look out at the city he had worked in his whole life from a vantage point that belonged to his daughter. Grief had a way of living in the body permanently, not as pain, not anymore, but as presence, as ballast, as the quiet, unshakable thing that kept her standing in rooms where everything was designed to make her feel like she did not belong. She set the nameplate back down at the head of the table, exactly where it belonged, exactly where it had always belonged. The afternoon light spread across the empty conference suite, across the white linen and the crystal decanters and the imported flowers and the signed contract in the center of the table. The nameplate caught the sun and held it. Isla Mercer smoothed the front of her emerald gown, picked up her portfolio, and walked toward the glass doors. She did not look back. She did not need to. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.